guys are having a fine evening so far. Get started in just a couple minutes. Just about ready to get started. Hopefully the chat works this week. I had some trouble with it last week, but I got a little iPad over here streaming it as well, so if it doesn't work with my normal stream, I got my backup. I won't be looking at the camera quite, but I'll figure it out. One way or another. You. All right, I'm gonna get started. So, a few people started talking about a lot of different things that they want to see streams on. One thing that was coming up was just some general techniques, rendering techniques. Hey Sebastian, hey Alex. Yeah, I can read you. I can read you. And I've got the stream over here as well, so like I'm trying to like double down on my technology. Philippe, Kira, Sleep and Dumplings. Hello everybody. So so just before I sat down, but just before I started streaming, I decided I was gonna do this like weird little robot to kind of use as our guinea pig tonight. And I'm gonna ink it. I don't think it's gonna take a tremendous amount of time to ink it, but I'll start with the line work. We'll flat it, we'll color it, and not color it, but shade it up. See if we can make it into something. And this will be sort of a, because it's got some organic shapes. It's a little bit of an organic technique, but at the same time, it's got some hard surface stuff in there as well. So it should be a good mix. And you guys just ask whatever questions you have as I'm going. I'll try and explain what I'm doing. It's a lot of the techniques are some of the stuff that I've done in previous pieces. But, I'll try and talk about some variations to some of that stuff. So if you guys are interested in that. Benny, thanks for coming out. All right. So I don't know if you guys can tell what this is, but that's a robot. And that's, I like to use this block out brush, which is it's in the free brushes that I have up on Gumroad, but it's basically just this like really transparent block, and it just sort of builds, and I'll kind of like work up my silhouettes with it nice and light, and then as you kind of go over it multiple times, it starts to get darker. Sometimes you can test out your lighting direction just to kind of see how it feels. So if I want to like have the lighting coming in from this direction, I can sort of like generally get an idea, and then it's good for, like I'm gonna have him kind of like cupping his own hands here, so kind of get some general idea of how the anatomy of his hands are gonna work for this thing, because he's a robot. Doesn't have to be perfect. It's the nice thing about robots. Let's see, and then his other hand is gonna sort of cup over, so he's going to be kind of doing this type of thing, I think. So I want to make sure I get his other fingers locked in. And so I like to map the foreground color and the transparent color on the button, so I can just kind of paint in and then reverse back out. And then I can just sort of play with that silhouette really fast. That way I don't have to think so much when I'm moving forward with the actual piece. Hey Kyle. Oh, I'm glad you guys are using the brushes. I don't want to put too much weight behind them as far as like how refined they are. Usually, it's not, you don't normally when you're downloading brushes, you're getting something that's been tried and true and probably has some demos that go along with it, but those brushes are brushes that I'm just constantly working on. So as I update them, if something changes in them dramatically, I'll put them up, and when they're final, which they never probably will be, I will let everyone know. Oh, good. I'm glad they're working out. All right, but you can see like that arm that's in the foreground. I'm just I'll sometimes block it in dark, and then I'll just sort of like reverse out the shadow, and because it's got a lot of transparency to that, it's nice because I can start to get some volume pretty quick, get an idea, and it's just so non-committal. You can play around with things a lot. So if I want to put like kind of like a hinged belly and some hoses, just kind of getting some ideas. I know I'm gonna have like kind of like camera lenses for eyes up here, poking out, multiple camera lenses. Cool. And then for the knee, just some general functionality. I really like the balance of like landing gear on like giant 747s and stuff like that, and fighter jets, how they have this like big heavy kind of smooth volume of a plane, and then there's like this really articulated small sort of slender strutting mechanism. I just think the balance visually is really appealing, so I always like to play off of those kind of negative shapes, so adding like little extra struts and kind of beefing up the hinge points off of his pelvis. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. And that's pretty much. Hey Casper, good morning. Oh, that's right, it's like 7 a.m. for you. Not quite ready to do anything in this world except for watch other people suffer. Let's see what I can do. Alright, so I'm just about where I would want to move on to just sort of doing a slight tight rough. So I'm just going to drop the transparency down and just move to one of these earlier newsprint ones. I'll try the dark today. The rough. And this again isn't going to be super tight because that kind of takes the fun away from doing it in the ink. I just want to refine some of these areas. It's 5. Aren't you and you're in like the Arctic Circle practically, aren't you? We can't imagine. Imagine how his belly kind of functions as some strutting, some big kind of like flappy hinges type thing. We'll kind of clean these up and make them a little bit more interesting when we get to the actual piece. And then I'll play off of kind of like the skeletal system for the way I'm going to do the pelvic area. So it has that stripped down kind of droid quality to it. So far the chat's working, but every once in a while you're gonna see me look over here because last week when the chat broke, I brought up another screen, so I just preemptively put up a screen over here. So if I just notice it's going quiet, you'll see me looking over there. Just double check that I'm not going crazy. Alright, so always need hoses. And then some people were talking about like how to balance sort of composition and rhythm, and so this is like a good example where like having like a nice big, we're gonna have all this detail in this belly down here, and you can see it's like 1/3 to 2/3 ratio of the body. So by kind of like flexing that ratio and kind of balancing it so it's really clustered, and then just letting the viewer have like a nice rest, drawing their eye up into the simple shape. That's a nice one. It's like a treat for the viewer. All right. Do like a simple ball socket. I'll add like a funny little side swivel screw in here. I like the sort of like gimbal screws that you see on some like old tech. Oh, cool. I'm actually really pleased that you guys are getting use out of them, because I didn't know that I'm talking about the brushes. I'm glad you guys are getting use out of the brushes. That's cool. They're like I said, I'm still working on them. Actually, I think there were some questions last week, like, like, is it important to still go traditional? And I was showing off some of my life drawings, and since then I've really given that a lot of thought, and I think one of the things that I'm going to start focusing a little bit on is trying to go traditional, and sort of like mentally measure what I want out of some of my digital brushes, because I think sometimes you want a digital brush that can do something that you could never do with traditional media, and I think other times you really want a brush that is exactly or as close to replicating something that you like to do with your traditional media. So because I'm having some opportunities to get in some traditional work lately, I think I'd like to be able to transition into some of the digital brushes more seamlessly. Alright, so we're working out the hips. I'm going to do this sort of like bow-legged thing, so it looks like he's cowering. So you can see it's like this nice cluster of detail. I think that's always really fun. And then then coming right out of that with a rest. So the legs will just be a little simpler. And I am going to tuck away that little piston that we in the back that I indicated, but I won't go crazy with it. I still want that rest. And then some knee pads. Yeah, I'm starting to like that. Alright, and get some of these eyeball camera things going on. One of my favorite objects, and I actually hope someday I stumble across one. I want to find one in the wild. I don't want to just like buy one on eBay, but it's those all kind of like old 50s large format cameras that have all the different lenses that you can just sort of spin them around on a dial. Oh god, they're just so beautiful. I love how they just feel like characters, little spiders or something. So I'm not obviously too worried if my ellipses are very good. What I'm more worried about is just the composition of and the placement of each of these. Make sure they all feel right. So I'm going to cheat and use the guides and clip because that's what they were designed for. I'll start to work in this arm here. So Philippe, you're in college right now. How is college? What is college like these days? I assume it's art college, which I would imagine people are missing out on crits and things like that. So robots' hands are kind of fun because you don't have to worry as much about the proportions and you can have a lot more fun with their gestures because of that. Alright, so that's his other hand kind of cupping his foreground hand. And oh, digital animation student. Digital all the way right now because you're actually, if you're gonna get a job right now, you gotta be like so good at taking Zoom meetings. So that's actually like ironically an extra bit of training that you're getting. I don't know if you're working remote, but I assume. So I'm pretty happy with that, but it definitely, you know, like as I work on these things, I start to look at like places where we can kind of like, you know, like break, almost like breaking frame in a comic, like ways to kind of draw things out. So I think like I want to add like an antenna or something like that, just to kind of find ways, like, you know, you have this beautiful smooth shape, and why not, once you're getting the viewer there anyway, why not take that opportunity to use it, show them something interesting, and then stuff like that. Don't have to go overboard, but you know, I just feel like that little thing, just those little things are helpful. All right, let's get this thing inked up so we can. Up, throw that in a roughs folder. We call it university. Ah, Costa Rica. I love Costa Rica. I don't know if it's the same there. Yeah, college. I think they psychologically call it college here because it's not paid for. You have to pay a bunch of money to go. Whenever I hear someone call it university, I just automatically assume that it's paid for. The tuition is paid for through your taxes. Maybe I'm wrong. Well, congratulations if you do graduate. Alright, so here I'm just using the ellipse tools like I've done in the past. Brush is just a little bit small for me. So I'm just going to slowly start building up that technology. Not everything is going to be using rulers, because I do like having little bits of just that hand drawn peel here and there, but I gotta know when to ask for help, I guess. Say one tip when you're inking or doing anything difficult. I think it's pretty natural that you steer away from the things that are going to give you trouble and kind of push them off till later in the piece. You get to them. And I do that stuff all the time. A little procrastination action, which I think is like part of the fabric of being an artist. But if you can hit them early on, like with those big curve shapes that I'm doing on the robot, if you can hit some of that harder stuff early on, I always find that I do it better because I'm fresher. I'm not quite to that I'm bored or lazy stage, and if I'm coming back the next day, I think that's okay. Yeah, the balancing act of getting your shapes to not compete it is a little bit by feel. You do have to kind of go through some trials and tribulations to kind of figure out like when they're competing, but like where do you want the person to look? I think that's always the key. And actually you can use detail in two different ways. Like sometimes detail is what draws you in. But sometimes you can use it almost like a texture that sort of like sets back. It works. It can work in a lot of different ways. And so you have to kind of like learn when and how you want the viewer to move through the piece. And that's why you definitely like I'm gonna up in the face here. I definitely want to have a little cluster detail, and I definitely want to have a dominant eye. If I put all those lenses the same size, I personally feel like it would it just wouldn't have the same flavor. Like it's like if you did all the teeth on something the same size. I just like there isn't the sort of like the hierarchy that you're looking for. They play supporting roles to each other rather than all playing the same note. Sorry, I'm concentrating. I do find that I can talk a lot less when I'm doing tech, because I'm trying so hard to get some of the lines parallel as much as possible, and just kind of go quiet, so don't take that personally. Alright, so now we can start laying in some of these lenses. Well, let's just sort of wrap up this shoulder. So one thing that I've talked about a couple of times is like, you know, like you saw me going to town on that shoulder a little bit. I like to indulge one of my bad habits, which is I finish one little area, especially on robots, so that I know kind of like how far I'm going to take everything. And that's not always like sometimes I'll take things further, but it's like a kind of a line in the sand that says like everything needs to be brought to this level. This is what we're trying to achieve in this piece. So that way, if I'm doing a quick sketch, you know, I know that I'm going to stop at that kind of level, and I'm not going to just over detail something else. I don't know. I don't think that by any means anything like that is necessary, but I like knowing that. I like knowing as much as I can ahead of time. It relaxes me. Just watching Star Wars with my kids tonight, so a little ode to those little extra pistons on C-3PO's arms, on the elbows here. I always, as a character designer, I always disliked them because there was a functionality. You know, you can't straighten your arms all the way issue. But but from the visual standpoint, they're beautiful. So I was never really able to add them into any functional character, but this guy's sitting still and nobody's going to be animating him anytime soon, so I can do what I want. So you'll see one of my bad habits that I've been doing, and I laugh at myself almost every time I do it. There's this button on the top right here to turn the rulers on and off, and it's mapped to Control 2. You can just turn them on and off just by hitting Control 2. So I can draw and then I can undo the ruler, but sometimes I have to like manually do certain operations, even though I have a hotkey for them. Like I have to physically do it, so I know for a fact that tool is turned off. I don't know. That's a like I just did it. Like that's like just like a little mental confirmation. But it has kept me out of trouble. That's not a tip. That's just like me exposing my bad habits. So because I'm going to be sort of like painting this thing up, I don't do a ton of inked shadows, but if something's really dark, you know, if it's going to be like a pit shadow, you know, like in this little shoulder crevice or whatever, I will still ink it down. That's a personal preference. If I was doing it properly, I wouldn't ink any of the shadows. I would let the color work do that. But who's going to stop me? Okay, so you work on the silhouettes first, right? Yes, absolutely. Do I do thumbnails? I always recommend doing thumbnails. Like if I'm drawing for myself, like I'm drawing with you guys, like this is just for fun, I don't do thumbnails. But if I'm trying to solve a problem, I absolutely do thumbnails. And I am probably just as bad as everyone. I don't like going through those processes. You say, oh, you always do thumbnails, blah blah blah. I think the general feeling is like we all want to know that we're process driven, that we go through step by step and do as much as possible. But we're also normal human beings or abnormal human beings, whatever you want to say, and it's not always fun to go through and do those. But because my old man advice is to push through that. If you're trying to solve a problem and you only give yourself your first drawing, 100% of the time that I've ever decided to just do the extra thumbnails, even though I thought I nailed it on the first try, 100% of the time I found a better solution after I've done the thumbnails. And so it's kind of like me in running. Like, I do not like running, but like once I go running and I do everything, I realize like, oh, that's much better. I did something for myself. I feel better. I'm healthier. It's a really weird analogy, but my point is, just because you don't want to do it doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do. And for character design in particular, it's so beneficial. So do the thumbnails. For this one, like, I don't do thumbnails for free drawing because I think part of the fun of free drawing for me is just finding out what it's going to look like. Like, I don't know what this guy is really going to look like. I didn't know ahead of time. And I enjoy that. I enjoy that kind of like that wonder of finding out along the way how this piece is going to evolve. So that's what I do for fun. But if I'm doing something that is for somebody else or for a specific project, I absolutely recommend doing thumbnails, getting everybody on the same page, getting yourself, exhausted of every possibility. I think that's really, really important. It's such a proud moment when you outdo yourself, when you fall in love with that first drawing and you think you nailed it, and you kind of have that like mental pat on the back kind of thing going on, and then you do some other versions of it and you come up with something better, right? Because that's who you're really competing against, is yourself. So thumbnails offer you this like really cheap and easy way to compete with yourself without sinking a ton of time in or effort. And then I just guarantee that you're gonna win most of the time. Robot thumbs are always hilarious to me. I built so many robot hands over the years in 3D, and trying to make that thumb joint work. It's like you always, these fingers are all basically the same usually, and so and they're almost parallel, even though they're not. But you want to be able to get them to display. But as soon as you introduce the thumb, it's like it just makes everything that you did on these fingers break down, and you're trying to keep them consistent. It would almost be easier if our thumb was just like a completely different shape. That way there was no trying to get it similar. to how that connects into his body after we get his belly done. Somebody hit me with a question, so I have something to talk about, something to think about while I'm doing this. It doesn't have to be anything to do with art. It could be about anything. I don't care. Well, maybe I care a little bit about what it is, but anyway, I want to answer it if it's super weird. And I have a pretty high tolerance for weird, so it had to be really weird. Do you ever do robot designs that can't work in 3D? Yeah, this one won't work in 3D. Not completely. You know, like I'm indicating functionality, and I think that is the main goal for any concept artist who's working in technology, is to imply functionality. And if you work with a really good modeler, a lot of times they can pull off something. We used to have a term called eschering, where it was basically you draw something that couldn't exist in 3D space, based on the artist MC Escher. And that was a cruel thing. I modeled a lot of characters, and when I got eschered, I was always both frustrated and also kind of like, sometimes it was like such an awesome challenge, you know, like you'd look at something and be like, that just can't exist. And then that was like, well, how do you make it exist? And then of course your best friend there is the animators. The animators will come and save you, because if they're passionate about the character, they will make it work. They will make it look like it functions. Even if they have to inspect your gadget, the way things pop out or move. But shoulder pads are like notorious for never working, and I love drawing shoulder pads on characters because just, you know, you get that heroic quality out of them right away. And then you put them on a character, and the riggers just come over and be like, does he need to have shoulder pads? No, doesn't need them. Alright, Jake's asking, what is my favorite art book to flip through right now? Oh, what is my favorite art book to flip through right now? I just got the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, the Sony animation book. That is just some of the most amazing artwork right now. And then the other one is Claws. That art book, I got that recently as well, and I can just stare at that all night long. So those are two favorite art books right now. I know they're not traditionally art, but they are just chock full of art from cover to cover. I mean like they're not art tutorial books or anything like that, but those two books are kind of like my favorites right now. Jessica's asking, your inking video helped me out. Oh, that's not a question. Oh, well. Yep. I'm glad you're getting something out of the directional inking stuff. Yeah, that's a lot of fun to kind of start experimenting with. Which movies do you recommend? Where do you get this creature robotic inspiration? I'm not getting it much from movies anymore. The robot stuff I get from just looking at objects all the time. You know, I really do like just like looking at objects and just kind of like, you know, and getting them embodied with some sort of like personality. I just, you know, and then you just kind of like start filling in that story. It does a lot of the work for you once you kind of get the ball rolling. You know, like if you saw the camera that I'm talking about that I like to base this kind of robot on, you would, you know, like once you kind of like imagine it's like an old cranky guy or something like that, you know, it starts talking to you, and you know, the whole thing starts to really develop for you. Just like video games, I actually had to stop I had to very consciously, years and years ago, stop playing video games, stop looking at them, and even with movies, I have to be really careful because I really want to come at things from a fresh perspective, and I've had to kind of give up playing and watching a lot of films. But I do, like movies like Amelie, and I just watched Ratcheted on Netflix, where like they're playing with really beautiful color palettes, and like the makeup design and costume design was so fascinating in that. So I get inspiration from not specifically what the characters are are looking at, but like what they're achieving, whether it's through color palette or through through the cleanliness of it or the dirtiness of it. That 50s stuff, which I think that whole series is set in the 50s, has a really beautiful functionality to it. It has like a lot of nostalgia that you can call back to, and people like that stuff. People like knowing subconsciously why something is the way it is, or why you built it a certain way. I don't know if that answers your question directly, but yeah, I try and draw inspiration from robots a lot, from construction vehicles and planes and jets and things like that. Motorcycles, oh my god, every time I see a motorcycle, like I can't even see it as a motorcycle anymore. Like motorcycles are little robots. Any tips on giving your robotic characters a personality? That's from Jessica. So what I like to do is I try to find a human that I'm sort of, or a human trait, but a lot of times it's a human that I actually witnessed, to kind of represent. Like I don't like to just draw a robot and have them not actually be an actual character first, because robots, it's really easy for you to just draw a robot and just do a lot of cool details on her and stuff like that. But if that robot is educated or just ornery or happy all the time, and you can imagine like a robot likes to play with toys, or really just can't help but want to fix everything, then all of a sudden, like when you go to start doing the details on that robot, specifically on the robot, then you're calling from this sort of like bouquet. That's a terrible way to describe it, but this sort of like bucket of traits that you can understand, like their motivation is to do something, right? Like I want this guy to be timid and kind of afraid, and I guess in the back of my mind, the reason the lenses are funny is because he's probably seeing something that's really awkward. It doesn't have to be specific, but I think like if you think about a camera taking a picture, but that camera is bashful about the thing that it just saw, like it got caught, like I just think that like all of a sudden now you're starting to hear a story. And I think when I did this sketch, I was starting to think like how that robot would act if it had camera lenses, and so I don't think it would be just like real proud or heroic or anything like that. I don't think that really matches. So I think telling yourself a little bit of a story helps kind of decide things for you as you're working on your robots. That goes for any character. Alright. Jake's asking, if you're into costumes and color palettes, check out Emma. Okay. I'm going to check out Emma. What is Emma on? Is it on Netflix? Amazon? I don't have everything. I don't have HBO. got rid of cable, which I found thrilling. Although AT&T calls me almost every day asking me to come back. Just about done with this belly tech, and then we can move on to some of the other parts and kind of wrap this up so we can move on to some of the shading and rendering techniques. So you can see, like, I am spotting some of these darker blacks for like these internal details, because I know that it's just pure black in there for the most part. So I like to go against my own best advice from time to time. Let's get it. And I do get caught up just making hoses, just like only doing hoses for tech. So like it's nice to every once in a while imagine just like a functional bit that isn't quite, doesn't have to necessarily work, but you can imagine, like, you know, like some emulation of the oblique muscles over here. Put like a little hinge section. Tech it up. So now we can do the pelvis bone, pelvic bone. It's not a bone, is it? Pelvic mechanism, pelvic, what is it? Pelvic apparatus. And then I think a big part of robots for me, and this doesn't go for every kind of robot design, but for me, and I think you guys, as soon as I say this, if you haven't realized it already, big part of robots for me is actually basing them off of the skeleton and insect legs, practicing how that stuff looks and feels, and the way the sort of flow. You know, I think, you know, like a wasp leg. It's just one of the most elegant forms, and I use that for sort of a lot of my inspiration for skinny legs comes from insects. I do a lot of skinny legs. Get a lot of "that guy missed leg day" comments. That's how I know I did my job right, when that comment comes across. Like I said, I was gonna go up and work on the face, but I just kind of want to get the parts down here done, and then I'll move. Just have some fun up in the face at the end. One of the most hilarious things about drawing robots too, especially when you put them into a gesture, is you draw something like for the first time, like the way I'm designing this leg, and God forbid you're happy with it, you gotta draw it twice in a different position. So you really gotta know how to turn your shapes. It does not always work out. I think that's one of my fascinations. I think if you ever guys ever want to call me out, see a robot with asymmetrical arms, one gigantic arm and one wee arm. Yeah, I probably didn't want to draw the arm twice. Come up with some baloney reason why I did it, but a lot of times it's just like, wouldn't it be cool if you had two separate arms? Take the hook, do the second leg. Alright, I'm starting to go quiet on you guys again. It's kind of like when let's imagine we're all like driving down some like New Mexico highway road in the middle of the night. You gotta hit me with some questions once in a while so I don't go completely quiet. Once I then let's do a little not a real robot if you didn't merge and duplicate things. Is his feet cropped to save time? No, I screwed up the composition. I think it was more like he was gonna get really thin if I shrunk him and put his feet down. Because I imagine if I was gonna draw him with his feet, they'd probably be another 2 inches down on the canvas, and then I'd probably add a little bit extra space just to kind of I wouldn't want him on the floor of the canvas, so I'd have to give a little bit of space, and so then he would get really skinny. So I think just for presentations, I wanted to make sure that this sort of filled the space. That was sort of just me being I kind of fell in love with that first sketch, like I said, and just gonna move forward with it. See. Oh, Jessica asked, would you say knowing how to 3D well is essential to getting into video game industry? No, actually less so than ever. I don't think it's essential. I think any tool that you can muster to learn is an advantage, a huge advantage. So if you're just a one-trick pony and you're an amazing concept artist, that could be just fine. If you can do your job without 3D and you're just rocking it, there's no reason for it at all. But I think if I'm speaking plainly, video games are what you see presented to you from art books and what did I just do? If you look at an art book, it looks like they just knew what they were doing from start to finish. And I get the impression that from film, that there is sort of this tried and true process. After previs, there's the experimentation stage kind of subsides, and I think the way to make a film starts to take over. There's a quality. I think that's amazing, but with video games, I think there's a part of the fabric of making video games is wanting to try things new, do things that no one's ever done before, and I feel like that lends itself to artists and designers and whoever you're talking about, trying to broaden their skill sets and do things that are well outside their comfort zone, because I think that offers opportunities to do things in ways that no one else has done. Just like I said, I didn't play a lot of other video games, and I've kind of given that up almost entirely, mainly because I want to come at things from different points of view. But if you have a broader skill set and you really want to come up with a new idea, and I'm just going to use 3D as an example. It doesn't matter. It could be cooking. Having those other skills allows you to try things out that maybe just drawing alone isn't going to be able to generate. So, and then the other thing that's really nice about knowing 3D, if you want to get into the video game industry, when you're, especially as a concept artist, it's really important to understand who the next person you're going to hand your concept to is a modeler, most likely, or an animator, depending upon what type of game you're making. And I really took to heart the fact that even though I tried to deliver my best work to people at any given day, and that didn't always come true, but I wanted to. I had to remember that what I'm creating is going into someone else's hands, and then they have to do something with it. And if I'm constantly screwing people by giving them concepts that, one, just fundamentally cannot be animated, let's say like what we were talking about where we're eschering things, it just, you just can't do it. Well, you're just making your animator's life absolute hell, right? Or the modeler. If you're basically creating a character that just cannot be modeled, if you know your modeler is up for the challenge and they want that kind of challenge, okay, that's one thing. But if you're just willy-nilly, I'm just trying to sound as old as possible right now. If you're just haphazardly, willy-nilly, delivering concepts and you just don't care how they get built, well, two things are wrong there. One, you're not respecting the professionals that are down the pipeline from you. You're just making their lives more difficult. And so you're not going to get their best work if they're frustrated. And I think as a concept artist, I think deep down we want everything that we pass along to not only, be done well, but be sort of cherished and shepherded. And I can't tell you how many characters that if I got someone behind a character, they would take it and run with it and turn that character into so much more than I could possibly have imagined. And so with 3D in particular, understanding what I was handing to modelers just became so much of an asset. There was never a time where I designed something, and I think it actually even helped evolve my style, because I really do think a lot about volume and forms, and how they could actually be constructed. I don't typically draw things that are too abstracted, but that's really important to me, and I think it shows your team that you're thinking about them, and I think you get better performance, and I think your characters come to life, and I think when your team is in a better mood and excited about a character and they're not feeling like you shafted them, just the whole thing just comes together in a much more meaningful way. So that's a big reason why I always was a proponent of concept artists understanding 3D. But then again, going back to what I was saying originally, it also allows you another tool in your little toolbox of ways to explore ideas that you couldn't have explored in any other way. There's so many things that we just cannot draw, or compositions that we want to try out that if we were to laboriously go through and draw each one out, well, we may be wasting a ton of time when, you could just block a few things out in 3D and try a couple compositions. You don't have to trace over it, but it may just give you some insight into like your camera angle or your, the depth of field or whatever you want to be talking about, even the lighting, just to, so it's a tool. It is not by any means a mandate, but it does offer you a lot of freedoms. So if you have the opportunity to pick it up, I strongly recommend it. And actually, modeling is really fun. People make it sound like it's this completely other world. It's no different than drawing. It's no different than sculpting in clay. It just has hotkeys and tools that you don't know. Once you know them, you're making. Like one way or another, you're making. I still model. I still love modeling stuff. I'm working on a little robot model right now. Maybe I'll show it to you guys some night when it's a little bit further along. And I do all kinds of things with modeling. We were even trying to figure out what a front porch on our house was going to look like, and I was like, I'm just going to build it. I just built it in 3D. And of course, I built something that was like so much more elaborate than we could ever afford to build, so it was all for naught, but you understand. my son's learning CAD right now as well for one of his, I think it's drafting class in high school, and they're teaching him CAD, which I'm so jealous about because we had to do it all with pencils for my drafting classes. But and I think CAD is like 10 grand or something, some absurd amount of money, because they're really just focused on big industry building, not individuals, and they have like a student version, and he's just building away, and he built a rocket, and he had it 3D printed, and we launched it. I mean, it's just he's 14, and there's just like so many opportunities to try things, and he learned a ton from it. It was awesome. HUD's art. I absolutely love your designs. You inspire me. If you would shout out my Instagram at HUD's art. Well, if everybody's following along and anybody wants to do their little networking in here, like, awesome. Throw up your Instagrams. Don't be shy. It doesn't hurt my feelings at all. I mean, if you guys can get each other, following each other and chatting, definitely should. So if you guys have Instagram accounts, or if stuff that you want, want to point to people to, I'm just sitting here doing my lines. Please feel free. Just about done with the line work. We can move on to some rendering. Sorry, I was really contemplating just drawing something beforehand and then just going straight into rendering. Painting it up, but I don't know. I like drawing with you guys. So, as far as HUD's art, you were asking any tips on starting your own brand. I'm still kind of feeling it out myself. I know I've had some okay success with some of my previous ventures, and Creature Box, and that was a joint venture. Getting started with that stuff. The number one piece of advice I can offer, and I by no means am being able to hold on to this very well either, but is consistency. And the example that I always give is, there are bands that you listen to, and if you know albums are coming out every year or two, and it's consistently coming out, it doesn't always even need to be the best music all the time. It's just sort of like that reliability. That they're going to show up. Saturday Night Live's on at Saturdays. It's not there are nights where Saturday Night Live just completely bombs. It doesn't matter. It's there for you. It's this it's that reliability that people kind of start to sort of feed off of. And as soon as you stop showing up regularly, I think there is sort of a letdown. I think people, not consciously, but I think people just, they're not going to kind of stick around and wait to see if you're going to figure it out. So it requires kind of a little bit of a mental, hold on, let me get this light. There we go. It requires a little bit of a mental mantra that says, like, I'm going to post once a month. I'm going to post once a week. I'm going to post once every 2 days. Whatever it is, as long as it's consistent, as long as people can kind of feel like you're going to do that for them, because I mean, I hate to make it sound like we're the jesters in the crowd, but when it comes to like building brands and social media, like that's really what you're doing. You're catering. You're trying to get people interested in what you're working on. So it's your own brand of jester, but at the same time, you can't show up once in a while. You have to go for it and stick with it. So and that's really difficult, and I can promise you, I know that firsthand. That's really difficult. Inktober, which is going on right now, is a huge. It's like the proof of the pudding on that. Like everybody's got that first piece, and then it just like people just start falling off. That consistency is really tough to pull off. So you have to find a consistency that works for you, works for your schedule, works for your mental state. There's a lot of people who can post every single day and are there, and then there's other people who, that just drives them absolutely crazy. So if you are going to start a brand, if that's something that you really feel passionate about, just understand that what people want from you is that that you are all in on it, and that you're going to be there, and that you're going to show up. That is not the only thing about starting a brand, but that is one of them. And that is, I think, if as someone who watches his numbers and makes sure that people are showing up and things like that, that is the direct result of it, is knowing that people are going to be able to see new pieces regularly from you rather than just being sporadic. And I am not going to say that that's easy. All right, I'm kind of rambling at this point, but I hope that makes sense. And if you have any follow-ups on that, hit me. Question about style. Did your style evolve naturally, or did you push yourself towards a specific aesthetic? I have this whole thing about style, which maybe people are tired of hearing, but for me, style isn't something that you can get away from. It's your personality, it's your signature, it's who you are, and I've been drawing in a certain manner. Even when I go to life drawing and I sit down and I draw like as realistic as I can, people come over and be like, I can tell it was you. They know there's something about your hand that is like inescapable, which is torturous for me. And I'm just sort of like over these last decade or something like that, starting to kind of like find peace with that. But that is a tough thing to swallow, is the fact that you don't really find a style. You don't pick a style. You are already your style, and then you're just getting better at refining how you tell your story. How you I don't think anybody else is going to draw this robot this way. I don't think that that's a good thing. I think people should be drawing things better than me. I'm the least excited about my work than anybody. But the fact is, I also know that nobody else is really going to draw it the way that I draw it. And that is how, so even if I'm not the one that's happy with it, other people are. And I find that all the time. I come up and I meet someone who I've just like been drooling over for years, and I just tell them how much, I embarrassingly gush over their work. And you can just see in their eyes how tired they are of looking at their own work, even though, because it's not something that I can create personally, like I'm just like all in. I'm so enamored with it. So, and I've sort of made peace with that. I've made peace with the fact that that is probably happening in my own work as well. And I think anybody else who can kind of start to make the moves towards understanding that, you're not going to escape your style. You're not going to find a style. You just are your style, and you just have to start refining how you tell your story. That's not the best way I've ever explained that, by the way, but hopefully it makes a little bit of sense. All right, so I hid the rough layer. Got my ink layer. Anybody who doesn't use clip, I'll tell them a little bit about it real quick. There's this little lighthouse icon up here. If you put that on a layer, that becomes the reference layer. The lighthouse, the beacon. And then any layer that you use fills on below it or above it, it's going to reference the inks or that layer as the reference layer, but it's not going to actually, the fills aren't going to exist on that actual layer, which is a nice change up from Photoshop, which you really can only do the fills on the existing layer. So you can. So what I do is, just to get started, I always fill the outside, and then I just kind of like fill in the silhouette. Doesn't have to be perfect. And then I use a control click on that layer, loading the selection that creates, and I make a mask. I invert that mask, so now everything disappears, and now I do a full fill on that layer. And so now what the mask is basically doing is it's masking off everything outside the character, and that's because I inverted it, and now the fill is just like a solid color. I don't care what it is, I just need to use it to kind of refine my overall mask. And that mask and additional mask that I'm going to be adding will come in handy as I start to shade, because then I'll be able to load selections off of those. So, but by having that masked off, now every layer above it that I'm actually going to be doing fills on to kind of get like, the different metals and rubbers and things like that, I can link those down using these double ellipse icon, which in Photoshop is like you hold down Alt and you get the little arrow in between the layers. It's the same exact thing. And so now like I'm going to start filling in non-painted areas, like tech areas. So I'm going to call this layer tech. And I'm just going to grab a solid brush and just start painting in anywhere that I know isn't going to be painted. And I'm actually going to just go back and forth because I know I want some of the collars on these lenses to be painted, but just to kind of get it going, I'm just going to go kind of sloppy and then I'll refine it. Let's see. Casper, on the design and a lot of your other robots, you draw a zigzag lightning screw on the elbow. Does this exist, or is it a Greg thing? It's a so when when we were doing Ratchet and Clank, when we very first got started with those designs, the aesthetic was very much that it was supposed to look like it was hand built. He was running around with a big wrench, and so there was a lot of flathead screws. There was like oversized Tonka style screws everywhere, and so we were doing a lot of flatheads. And then I think over time we all simultaneously got sick of it, and we're trying to find other ways to represent sort of flathead screws, but have them look like they had a little bit more of a real world scale to them. So that was my take on it. I do the little zigzag, so it's basically just like a cop out for a flathead screw, because I still really like that aesthetic. I really like that idea, but I don't always want to actually have a legit flathead screw. So that is the origin of that. So I forgot a little bit of my silhouette in here, so I'll just knock that back out. And again, that's on my master mask layer, and that helps me. And then let's see. Philippe, you're saying, do you have some kind of preference on color palettes? Any tips on making colors that work well together? I steal happily, like without any guilt whatsoever. I steal from race cars. I have an entire directory of race cars and construction stuff, which I love as well, but that's sort of one note, right? But race cars, they're always looking for ways to stand out. The European race car circuit is very aesthetically tuned. They have really beautiful cars. I would never in a million years have mixed white, dark red and green, like forest green together. But then you see it on a race car in Europe on some Lotus or something like that, and it's the coolest thing in the world. So I look around for race cars and palettes like that, and I just pin them. I pin them on my Pinterest, and I don't always call directly from them, but I definitely know that like I'm thinking about them as I start to build things up. So I do look around for color palettes that excite me. I think that's how I'm using reference more these days than I am using it like on how to draw things. I'm actually using it to find interesting color palettes and lighting scenarios. Those are the things that are where I want to be expanding and learning. But yeah, I mean, you do kind of get a feel for what works well together. Cross complementary, everything we learned in school as far as like color theory goes, that stuff all plays really well. So if something's not working and you have to cool it down, because everything is feeling warm and so that everything's getting drawn out together, those are all still really valuable things to use. So but I think it gives you that understanding of color theory gives you insight as to why you like the color palette that you're stealing from some piece of something that you pinned on Pinterest or something like that. All right, let's make this one. I don't know if they should all be painted. I'll make sure that you get a little bit of that erratic quality, just like we have in the scale. Let's try it, I guess. Maybe just the rim on this one. So I'm not, again, I don't know if I know I repeat myself a lot on these because I'm not doing anything completely unique each time. But I'm not really worried about the color yet. I'm going to go back and dial that. I'm just trying to get my masks done. So I know like the pink areas right now are going to be the painted areas. I know that the dark gray is like the tech area. And so now I want to do a secondary color to, like trim colors on the character. So I'll do that. And then I'm going to do the lenses. And then I might break up the tech into sort of like light, medium, and dark tones. So anyway, so let's do the secondary color. So it's usually, my secondary color it isn't always, but it's usually a similar color but darker. Not always. If you do a dark blue character and you do like orange stripes on it, brighter orange stripes, that looks pretty badass. So we'll get some patterning going on. And because I'm working below the tech, I can bleed into that without too much issue. I think we're gonna put a racing number or something on the side of this guy. I think that'll look cool. And just having that secondary color is like an opportunity to have certain things stand out. Just pop a little bit, like the knuckles on this guy. Actually kind of digging the pink, even though I'm not going to leave it. I think it's kind of cool. I don't know. We'll find, maybe if we leave it pink, we'll do like a pink and purple maybe. I don't know if you guys have paid attention at all, but so much of my work has purple in it. I guess. Alright, let's get some of the lighter metals going. So, those are like the screw tips. I'm one of those geeks that likes when people like build like custom cars and stuff like that, and they have all brand new hardware, shiny, like bolt patterns on differentials and things like that. I think that stuff's fantastic, even though it's like completely obnoxious. I like it. Some dark rubbers. His shoulder needs to be kind of like a deep dark color. And we're gonna chip this paint all up and everything too, so there'll be that part of the stage. So we'll go through that. All right, and last but not least is the lenses, and I'm just gonna choose some obnoxious color for the lenses just so I can really see it. They will not stay that color. Sometimes it's nice to just do them as like glass. Other times it's nice to make them look like they're glowing. And just whatever, we'll do that. Okay, so that kind of gets me all my masks. Now I can start making some color choices. So let's try working on this pink and see if we can't make it. I think a pink robot would be kind of cool, but towards the purples. And then secondary color, let's try a couple different, like a deep purple. It kind of starts looking, yeah, kind of digging that. It looks, it's like the right balance of feminine and like, I think we can work in some like even like a third color, like maybe like when we do like a logo on the side of him or something like that. That'll look pretty cool. And I really like when something was supposed to be really clean, and even some of the more feminine tones, traditional feminine tones, and then you muck them up and get them all rusty like that thing that just like was in tons of war battles and stuff like that. I like that contrast. I like the way that those two things force each other to have a little bit more of an interesting story. All right, so I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna move to Photoshop. Second here. And again, my excuse for this is I am just too lazy to move my brushes over to clip, but there's no reason to actually move into Photoshop if you don't want to. And I've been a little bit lazy. I'm going to name my layers real quick because once I start working, I kind of lose track. It's nice to be able to refer back quickly. Name your layers. Okay, so that's my flats. Put those in a flat group, and that way I can refer back to that when I need to. So let's get the painted areas all rusted up. So the way I like to do this, if you guys haven't seen it before, is I start with kind of like a dark gray. And then I grab some sort of like rusty colors, red browns, things like that, and I get some sort of like noisy brush. Got these like cloud smoke brushes. Doesn't really matter. I'm just gonna start getting some modulation going. And it's nice to go a little oversaturated sometimes because you can kind of go a little bit nuts. And this does not have to be beautiful in any way. It just has to be modulation. You have to imagine what rust looks like underneath the surface of the paint, because we're going to chip away and we're going to reveal this. Lower my opacity. So you can imagine what I'm just kind of imagining when I'm doing this rust is like, you know, like those old tractors and old pickup trucks that you see like in pictures in Lost in the Woods and stuff like that have been just sort of like rotting away. So now that I have that, I'm going to put a mask on that, and I'm going to make that mask completely black so that I can't see it any longer. And I'm just going to slowly start adding chips into that paint. And I'll start with a solid brush, just a simple solid brush, because I want like my initial marks to be real deliberate. Put my opacity back up. So the initial marks that I'm making are sort of like the really nice hand-painted stories that I want to tell. And because I'm using a mask rather than just painting these in, I can keep my finger on X on the keyboard, and I can alternate between the black and white colors, and I can just, you know, add, subtract, and kind of get these nice organic marks. And at first, it never looks like you're actually doing a good job. And I've always had that moment where you're just kind of frustrated. You just don't feel like it's going to work. And I can promise you, if you just stick with it and just keep working, and the nice thing about it being on a mask is that you can really easily correct yourself. But you're just looking for those high edge areas, you know, like the front of this lip on the front of his sort of like rib cage here. That would definitely be taking a lot of wear. And his knuckles. And then it's always an opportunity to put like a real deliberate rust chip somewhere, you know, like something that really feels like something hit it hard there, or scratches or something. Just kind of go back and forth, chew it, get it worked up. And we're gonna go back and we're gonna do some sort of like feathering down using some noisy brushes. This is why it's important to always have your arsenal of like downloaded brushes, all the different noise. That it almost even doesn't matter what noise it is. It's just, you just want variations of noise at your disposal. And actually, Photoshop stamp brushes aren't that hard to make. So if you find a really high resolution image of rust, metal, or something like that you like the patterning in it, or if you find something you can take a picture of with your camera and you just with your phone, and then you just sort of levels it out, get a black and white stamp out of it that works really well. You can make a brush out of it and have something that no one else is using. I think that stuff is so fun. Alright, so I've got my deliberate stuff in, so now I'm going to use some scratches. Yeah, so start by just kind of like, and you can overdo this really easily, so I'm just going to start by just slowly bringing this up. And these are like the real hardcore scratches, and then using more of like a dust to kind of make it look like some of the paint is thinning out. You know, it's on its last leg type of thing. And then I don't know, go a little bit nuts. And please hit me with some questions if I'm doing something that I'm just kind of like glazing past or whatever. And then for the tech, I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lock the transparency. This will be kind of like a cheap and dirty way. I'm just going to add like a little bit of metal modulation in there. So just kind of get a little bit of noise in there. Not too much. There we go. And then the last thing would be some, you know, like wherever the oil is sort of dripping out. So I'll do that as a multiply layer. I'll do kind of slightly dark gray, but I like to always warm it up. Imagine it's like motor oil or something like that. So just brown it up just a little bit. And then just start thinking about where oil might be dripping out. Kind of scuzzing things up. The hardcore brushes, I've either downloaded them or made them. I honestly don't know. I've had so many brushes for so long. I haven't downloaded a lot of brushes recently. But at this point, if I don't know that I've deliberately made it, I don't share them, just because if it's something that somebody worked hard on making, I definitely don't want to be that guy who gave it out to everybody if they were trying to make a living off of it. That looks terrible. Hold on a second. But if I come across some brushes in the future that I think are really spectacular, and they're everywhere right now. I mean, people are just making brushes. I will promote them. I will download them and try them out, and then I'll promote them. That way everybody can support them and also get some use out of what they're making. The only reason I haven't downloaded a lot of brushes lately is, as you can see, I have a lot, and I'm pretty satisfied with them. Not because that all of them are good, but just because there's a lot of variation, and I can do pretty much everything that I want to do. And as I'm saying this, I'm realizing it's probably a good time to start making some brushes. All right, so there's that, and now we need a logo. I think we're just gonna do like a simple. I'm gonna do it above the line work for now. I think we'll do like a simple kind of like racing inspired thing. So start with kind of let's start with this pink. And then I couldn't figure out why it wasn't showing up. I have it underneath. I hate waiting for my fonts to load in Photoshop. I don't know why they take so long. All right. So that's my logo. I'll take a merged version of that, and I'm just gonna find a place here for it. So use the warp tool. So the warp tool in Clip is more of like a mesh, like a lattice mesh, and then you can add as many divisions as you want to it, which is pretty cool. So if you want something to bend very specifically, you can set up a mesh with like a ton of different subdivisions. And then the warp tool in Photoshop is curve based, so it's you really just get these control points. And I think, you know, like I can imagine product designers wrapping their logos around soda cans and granola bars and things like that. There we go. Do you pay for the fonts? Yes, I pay for all my fonts. I pay for every font and brush that I can. I find it, like, you know, I was in a position, just like everybody is, where, you know, like that stuff adds up really fast. But I've been using this stuff for a really long time, and it's an art to make that stuff. And I'm a huge proponent of being able to support other artists. So if they're making awesome fonts, you know, Blambot has amazing fonts. I try not to use free fonts or fonts that I haven't paid for ever anymore. That's not like a scolding. I think we've all had to do our fair share of robbing. So when I put these logos on, I like to then kind of chip them away a little bit too. And I think that always adds just a little bit of story to them as well. So it looks like it's actually, you know, on the paint a little bit. I love, you know, like when old Ford pickup trucks, you know, with like electricians' logos on them and things like that. I think that stuff is really cool. Do I have a favorite font? No, I don't think I actually have a favorite font. I like the sign painter type style fonts. I think those always look really cool. maybe, yeah, you know what? I'm going to add some tape. I always add tape. Yeah, if you, Blambot's awesome. And he has sales every year. And so, even if you can buy just like a font or two from him during the year, at the end of the year, go and just buy as many as you can when he has his sales. I think it's at the end of the year, I don't know. Do you tend to use a big amount of layers? Yeah, I'm kind of. I don't mean to. Mentally, I do this thing where if I'm using too many layers, I feel like I'm working on something that I don't know how to do. So, it's not that I don't think a lot of layers is valid. I think it's more. I'm trying not to use that many layers as proof that I've actually done my homework and learned how something actually goes together. But when I'm learning something for the first time, when I'm trying to figure out like how something works for the first time, yeah, I mean this, like, I have to almost change my workspace because of the number of layers that I have to use. But I do group things and label things as best as possible. That's going to be something that I harp on a lot. Alright, so I'm going to use that as my flats. And now I'll jumping into the shading. So for the shading, I like to do that inside of a group layer. I like to use the exact same mask that we created for the overall silhouette. I like to drag that, just the mask. You hold down Alt and you just drag it up, and you can put that on the overall group. And that way anything that you're doing inside that group is masked off. And that works really well for characters, not so much for environments, because environments, obviously the... And so tonight I'm going to do, because I'm in Photoshop, I can do this. I'm going to use a solid color, and I can change that to something garish. I like to work kind of neutral for my initial shading, but and a little bit darker than what I'm probably going to go with. But you can just do a fill, or if you keep these live colors, it's nice because then you can change this color really easily. And I actually think it reduces the file size a little bit, just because it's more of a dynamic layer. Okay, so I'm going to set that to multiply, and you can see how dark everything gets. And so because I don't really want to be influenced by the shading, the flats below it, I'm going to put a white layer below it, and I'm just going to drop the transparency of that down to maybe 75%. So I can see a little bit of my flats, but you can see like when I turn it off, like I'm only seeing just like a little bit of those flats. And that's the way I like to work. And so now let's start laying in the shadows. So I'll invert the layer, and I always like to start with just like a simple soft airbrush, soft brush, and wipe in like my major shadows. And I think I'm gonna try, just because I know I want to have these lenses illuminated, so I think it's a good time to I'm gonna light it as if it's being lit sort of from the back, sort of the back 3/4, and that these lenses are going to be in shadow, and that way when I illuminate them in the final passes, they're going to pop a lot more. They're not already in light mass. But I do want to indicate that some of the back is still getting rounded over. So I'm going to use my selection technique here, where I make selections and I just paint inside them. And then I always I always laugh because circles are the one thing that I do different than everything else, where I do everything, I shade things from light to dark typically, but with circles I tend to just fill the whole thing in and then just use the soft brush to kind of bring up the highlight, and then you can go back and put a shadow on, and it just, I don't know, it's just so much faster to do it that way. So I'm going to start zooming in a little bit just because I think we all need to see what we're working on a little bit better. So back to the 3D, my little rant about learning 3D. You know, that's the question I get a lot, because I think a lot of concept artists are nervous that, you know, maybe whatever they can't draw is going to show up, or I don't know. There's a lot of reasons why concept artists want to have more robust skill sets. But the skill set that I think is really valuable is understanding how to render volumes, really volumetric stuff. It's not always the most beautiful thing. You know, and what I mean by that is, like, it's not, you know, it's not always like, it's sometimes, you know, a piece would look so much better if you did graphic lighting, or if you did, you know, if you just, you know, did more simplified lighting, whatever. But if you can indicate how forms work to your modeler and to the lighter, and if you work in a company that has someone who's doing the surfacing of the models, they get a lot out of it, you know, and that's part of the job, is to really understand that stuff. Here, let's get these lenses going, and then we'll work our way down. So So like you can see, like I just made that selection. It's a little bit sloppy, and you know, because I know all that's in shadow, I could just paint that in. But if you're in a place where you did some really detailed shading and you need to just tweak it a little bit, you can just use the smudge tool, and you can just kind of like scoot over that error, and that gets you out of your trouble. So this technique, like as I described before, it's sort of laborious. You know, the making selections over and over. You know, it can be exhausting. But I don't know. I think the results, just going like step by step, piece by piece, just kind of, it builds up, and it just starts to come together. And I find it a little cathartic in kind of a strange way. And I love finding opportunities to cast shadows from one object onto another. It shows a lot of distance between the forms. Ash is asking, do you have any inking brushes similar to the Clip Studio brushes for Procreate? No, I haven't gotten into Procreate enough to make brushes. I just sort of got it because everybody was on it. But I will say it's been made plain to me that I'll take the front of that off. That the brushes in Procreate look amazing, and there's just tons of people doing amazing brushes out there with that stuff, with that program. So if I'm not making one, which I'm not, there's got to be gobs and gobs of amazing brushes out there. And if anybody knows anybody, put them in the chat, because Procreate's awesome. I love the recording stuff. It's such an awesome opportunity for people to be able to look back at their work, and I don't know, time-lapsing your drawings, that's such a satisfying, I don't know, not always, but I don't know, if you speed it up, it always looks like you know what you're doing. Even when you make a mistake, it's like, oh, it's consciously making choices, blah blah blah. I feel like that's such an awesome opportunity to be able to show like that thing's off in the distance and the light is casting over it. I love those opportunities. And then because I know that this overall form is arcing over this way, then I can take this straight and I arc it, and it just informs the viewer that form has that round shape. And you can even trick people with that. Like that's like, you could do it a different way, and even though like the form that you drew says to do it one way, because you render it a different way, it actually looks like it's a flat form or something like that. So it's a really powerful technique, or a powerful tool in your quiver. And I've said it in the past, but always make sure, look for your big shadows that need to be blocked in right away, because there's always that moment where you spend so much time rendering something, like, and then you realize something casts a shadow over the top of it, and you just have to obliterate the whole thing. Like if I spent all this time inside these hands down here, where I know that the light is getting occluded by the fingers, then what a waste of time. Like I would have rendered all that stuff out. Like these fingers are all going to be in shadow. So I try and knock those things in as quickly as I can, so that I don't end up conning myself into rendering something that I really didn't need to render. Only got so many hours on this earth. Gotta make more pieces. What do I want to work on? I'm gonna finish this elbow up, I guess. Let's look again here. I'm realizing that all of this is going to be in shadow, and had I not paid attention, I would have just spent all this time rendering that stuff out. So Casper saying, my PC has a hard time with RAM-wise handling multiple lasso selections in Photoshop on one big file. How powerful is your machine? There's settings in the workaround. I won't lie, I have a very powerful machine. It's just because I was, we were making games and videos and things like that for so long, that I definitely invested in a machine that was very robust. That is not obviously something that everybody can do, and I'm trying to think of a solution for settings. And if there's any PC gurus out there, I think as people are starting to learn, I'm not the best IT person in the world. But one trick, Casper, honestly, is with this shading, it is totally fine to do the shading layer at half res. You could save out a duplicate version of your file, like do all your flats at full res, and then save a duplicate just for shading, maybe merge all the flats together or something like that, and then drop the overall file resolution to 50%, and then do all your shading at that setting. And the reason that it would work is because you could bring it back into the original file and scale it back up, and unless there's like a really specific detail, a lot of the noise and kind of like flowing forms and a lot of the other things that you're going to do are going to hide any slight bit of blurriness that you're going to get from that up-resing. So that might be a solution at a pinch. Certainly not the best. Tommy's saying something. There's a setting, a preference that allows you to allocate more of your RAM to Photoshop. Yep. And what that will do, you have to make sure that you open up Photoshop before you open up anything else when you start messing around with those settings, because it kind of does a land grab for your RAM. So you do have to make sure that if you set it pretty high and you plan to have other software open, make sure that you're opening Photoshop first so it can do its sort of RAM land grab first, and it won't let it go. It's going to hold on to that. It's going to partition that part off and say, like, this is mine. And then from there, you should be in better shape. And then I think Philippe's talking about the scratch disks as well. So you can go into your settings and add some of your other your other hard drives in as scratch disks, and that can help as well. That's not as much of a performance thing all the time. Not every aspect of Photoshop uses the scratch disks, but I don't know I don't know what the selections use. It'd be a fun experiment actually to figure out like what the different tools are using. When I say fun, I don't think that's actually that fun now that I think about it twice. Alright, that's starting to work. Oh, you doing Inktober, Nick? What was the prompt for today? Or did you even use the prompt? What did you do? A lot of big, gigantic swords. That would have been my first go. Did a samurai, yeah. It's awesome. Well, Nick, you did the work. Put your Instagram into the chat, and that way everybody can go check out what you posted. I'm guessing you didn't make it so that nobody saw it. All right. Get everything? Yeah, we can always go back if I miss something, but I think that's getting to be right. Okay, so now let's turn off our layer. We'll kind of take a quick peek at what we're starting to get with. Okay, so for metals, you definitely want to, for me, I really like adding the core shadow. So again, I'm going to use the solid color and just do black, and I'm going to link that down using the Alt button so that it's only affecting the shadows, and then I'm going to invert that mask, and then I'm going to, or I'll turn this back on so it's real easy to see. So just where the forms are turning, I'm going to start I'll lower my opacity a little bit because I don't want this to be too crazy, but as the forms turn, I want that pit shadow to exist, and this is real aggressive right now. We're gonna dumb it down in a second. But as the forms are turning, and then the other reason I use this layer is to do sort of like a little ambient occlusion pass. So wherever forms are really not able to get light into them anymore, it's a good place to darken them up a little bit, you know, under here where light just cannot get in. It doesn't have to be real dark, but just I know that light is not getting in there. So I'm letting this layer do a little bit of double duty. I'm letting it do my core shadow, which is basically the terminator as it goes around, and also my pit shadows and my ambience. And if anybody doesn't know what ambience are and things like that, just throw it in the chat if everybody's just bored to death of hearing about that stuff. I won't mention it. Alright, so I went overboard. Actually, I'm going to calm this down just a little bit. And now I'm just going to drop the opacity of that test down a little bit so it's not quite so harsh. Oh, Nick, you came late. I was using the ellipse tool in clip. Like, I didn't freehand those by any means. I'm the king of being willing to use the ellipse tool. All right, So now he's got his shadow done. So now what I'll do is I'm going to grab my flats and I'm going to duplicate those right up here above my shadows, and I'm going to merge that entire group, and I'm going to put that inside of its own subgroup here, and I'm going to take my shadows mask, the overall mask, and I'm going to drag it up onto that group. Now I'm going to invert that so that basically what the mask is doing once I've inverted it is it's only showing those flats in the light mask. And now I go down to the actual layer that is the light mask, and I'm going to change that to linear dodge add, and you can see it immediately brightens all of the light mask areas up. And then we can't just leave it like that. We want to probably do a little bit of adjusting. I think, well, sometimes it's nice to drop the saturation down a little bit, even darken it just a little bit, and then just ever so slightly either cool it or warm it, because these are your highlights after all. So you can see I just kind of like warm that up. Now I'm going to put a new mask on just that layer, and I'm going to turn it to black. And so now with an almost fully opaque brush, I'm just going to soft brush, I'm just going to start bringing in highlights. And what's happening is, you know, like you can see the difference in the color of these two highlights. It's picking up the darker color. As I turn the mask off, you can see it's got a darker color, and then the pink is a lighter color. And so it kind of respects the highlight color that is underneath it. And so when I do, especially metals, I always kind of go overboard first and just kind of go nuts, kind of make them real garish and do a lot, and then I go back and kind of calm things down. So I think it's a lot easier to understand your highlights and your shadows if you're going a bit overboard and then dial them back. Try and get them right the first time, that first level. And I think so. And then the highlights kind of double as reflections a little bit, and so metal tends to pick up a lot of secondary reflections. So you're not always just doing one highlight. You know, sometimes you're representing the fact that it's like it's living in a world, and it's got these little secondary reflections going on. Pick up the highlight. So I'm kind of stippling this one in. I'm not just like plopping it in because I'm imagining like that's some pitted metal or something like that. I'm getting ahead of myself, but yeah, so and this is one of those moments where you start to ruin it before. Oh, see, I forgot the shadow on the bottom of that. Let me put that in real quick. Here we go. Happy little shadow. All right. So this just looks so garish at first because everything is just so bright. Like every highlight makes it look wet, and I don't know. I get really frustrated because I feel like I am not able to gonna be able to pull it off. But if you stick with it, we're gonna calm those down, and it will start to feel a bit more controlled. So if I haven't said it in a video that you've watched, highlights are where the surface of a form really show if it's mirror clean or if it's if it's got a lot of chips and things in it. And so when we go through and we do a lot of these kind of like bright highlights initially, it always looks too clean, and that's when it's time to go through and start. I use stippling at first. I just kind of like start breaking up the highlight, and like if you think about pavement, like you see I think it's always funny, you see pavement laid down for the first time, and it actually has like some reflections in it, you know, like it actually is like this nice oily material, but it actually is really pitted, and so it's okay to have something that has a lot of little nooks and crannies chopped out of it. And this is a back and forth process where you just kind of start chewing away and adding scratch. You can use your noise brushes. So if you have brushes with good chips in it, you can go and just start taking that highlight apart a little bit and just scratching it up. And it adds a lot of character to the highlights. You can see they automatically start to read as the correct surface. So just by taking them back a little bit, it goes a long way. All right, so and then kind of look for some of the edges that are probably catching the highlight just a little bit more. And we're going to go through and do one more highlight pass just to kind of really pop the things we want to pop. But you know, like some of these under edges. Already started them here. You know, like on the other side of this metal, where it's just catching a little bit of the light. These scribe lines that I drew in, you know, like they catch light on the other side. This tape. Those little details go a long way. So now let's get a background going so that when we do the reflected color, we know where we're going. So the reflected color is nice because it's really going to help kind of set the mood. So I'm going to keep the background a little bit dark, I think. I'm going to do my kind of typical, well, let's see what works. Let's find the shape first. Don't want to create any tangents if I can help it. I'm just throwing in any color right now. Hold on a second. Don't really care what color it is. Okay, so and then I think I'll sort of smoke up the bottom a little bit. I like doing that. That's kind of my go-to. This like really clumsy brush, and then do I always have a one color shading layer on multiply, or do you ever make specific shadow colors for each different color on the normal layers like an analog? No, I usually keep one global color. I know that's not 100% accurate, but yeah, that's typically what I do. I think my justification for that is that the shadow is really just the color that the light, you know, of the ambient light, the darkest ambient light in the environment. So try not to worry about it modulating too much. Alright, I think this just needs a little bit of variation to it. So I'm just trying to ever so slightly pick up some of the color of the robot to go through it. So it has a little bit of a synonymous, or well, it's late enough at night where my brain stopped working. Same question with the light overlay layer. Well, the trick that I just showed right there was my cheat. If you really wanted to pay attention, the color of the highlight is really going to depend on the material that's going on underneath it. So if it's paint and it's much more of like an anodized metallic flake or something like that, well then that highlight's going to have a lot more color in it. But by default, it's going to have a little bit of the color of the paint, but then depending upon how much metallic that actually is reflecting, it's also going to have color of the light source itself. So you're going to have to find the balance there. And then the rubber, like dark gray rubbers, those are gonna absorb a lot of light, so they're gonna have very little color in them. So if you really wanted to take your time and kind of explore that stuff, that's gonna be the better way to get a much more accurate highlight color. But I think you guys probably aren't going to want to watch me establish each individual shadow color. I think that would probably it takes a long time, and I enjoy doing that. I think that can be a lot of fun. I think you're getting much more accurate responses, but it's not quick and dirty like that technique that I just showed you. All right, that's going to be our background. Okay, so now I know that I'm going to kick a little bit of blue in from the other side. Let's do that. So I'll just hit a solid color, kind of a greenish blue. Okay, I just have that in the wrong place. That's why it looks kind of bizarre. All right, so now I'm going to, I'll set that to overlay will work. Or add will work, and then I'm gonna go back and edit that down. I'm gonna drop that color down, just kind of imagine what that reflected color is. Then I'll take that mask and make it black, and then just start working in areas that are receiving some of the reflected light. Now in this piece, I wanted to get this kind of like front panel receiving a little bit of that light. And I have my brush turned way down so I can just sort of build this up slowly. And then this back edge over here is probably going to get a much more intense version of it, so we can imagine that light source, that secondary light, is much more intense off to the off its sort of like left shoulder. And then as we add that in, things just start to pop all of a sudden. And I get a little sloppy, and I'll have to go back and kind of make some tweaks to kind of clean it up. But I want to establish where they go, where some of that stuff goes early on. Maybe under here is just receiving a little bit of light. Some of these cylinders are getting a little bit of kick light. You can immediately see how it just starts to pop. It actually has so much more volume because it feels like some of these more shaded areas are starting to get a little bit of bounce light from the environment. Philippe's asking, any tips on rendering like glass or jelly materials? Yeah, I'm going to do the lenses in a second. I'll do a hybrid of a glowing lens, but I think the overall the quickest way to render glass is to remember that, like, if something has like a dome shape or a cylindrical shape, when you look through it at its most horizontal or parallel to your eyes, the plane is in front of you of that glass. It's going to be its most transparent and probably the lightest. And then as those materials sort of turn around, they're going to get more opaque, just because it's like the forms are actually building on each other. So the initial way to start rendering them is to start light in the middle and go dark on the outside. That is how the form is working. That's not how the reflections are working. So then you're going to want to work up reflections, and then you're going to want to work up highlights. And it's those three stages that I use to kind of get glass to feel a little bit believable. So I'll show you that. So now I'm just kind of going through and doing a little bit of custom work on these reflections. Increase that a little bit. It doesn't need to be perfect. I actually find that the kick light itself is one of the areas where you can really cheat and do a lot of just kind of quick and dirty, real representational stuff. Because you don't, I don't know, at this point you've got so much going on that you know, you're overthinking it if you're going too much further. Okay, so let's get the lenses going. So I usually do keep glass on separate layers just because it requires a little bit of a different rendering technique. So I'm going to go back into my flats. I'm going to load the selection from my lenses, and I'm going to make a mask up here. I set that to multiply. Actually, just because it's so unique, I'm going to put a group together of just the lenses. Channel 9 new spot? Yeah. You get it. No, I don't know. I was thinking he was like a race. Well, you're right, because these cameras. I don't know. I hadn't really thought about it that well. The 9 just looked cool on it. I think you're probably the closest. Alright, so we're going to use a dark kind of multiply on the perimeter here as the glass turns, right? Okay. So now each piece of the glass, as the glass dome is kind of turning away, it's got this nice darkness to it. And then I am going to make it look like these guys are illuminated a little bit. So I want to grab that same mask, and I'm going to set that to add. That works pretty well. And I'm going to start working up kind of like a central light inside each of these. Yep. And that will help me, because that light is going to be dominantly adding reflections to the glass. So now we can do the reflections. So I'm just wasting time. I can put that overall mask on the lens group itself, and I don't have to keep adding that mask to the individual layers. All right, so now we're going to do just the reflections, and I could do these all on the same layer, but I'm chicken. Okay, so I'm going to start with an outside reflection. This is just sort of starting to look at the world. And now that one's pretty simple, and then this is the one that I think kind of really does the trick. So I imagine the sky color, probably not that saturated, maybe nice sky blue, real bright. And I'm gonna set that to add. And I'm just gonna real heavily on the top side of the lenses, I'm gonna drop in some of that color. All right. Now I'm going to slowly start removing stuff. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to build my landscape. So because these are concave, they are reflecting like fisheye versions of the landscape. So we're going to, just because it's it works as kind of an icon, I'm going to carve little mountains into the reflections. And you want to kind of keep these the same on each reflection because it's the same landscape that it's reflecting, just generally. And then I think because it's concave and that sky is getting reflected, I kind of remove around the edges so it's mostly towards the highest point towards the form. So I'm just sort of like slowly erasing around the edges, and then I just drop that transparency down so it's just barely there. And it just kind of indicates like there's like a little bit of a reflection going on. And then the last thing you do is you add just like a nice anime highlight. And I think we could probably use this blue as a starter color, just so we know that that's sort of like the parent. And it's just a nice tight little highlight. And for me, that's how I get glass going. And it's not perfect, but it's what I like to do for glass. I think I like that kind of sells that story. Okay, so above the line work, I'm gonna put a layer, and I'm gonna also set that to add, and I'm gonna grab a little bit of this blue, drop my transparency way down, and I'm just gonna add a little glow to each one of these things to kind of get them to pop. There we go. And then go. And let's see, what else do we got to do? Oh, yeah, we're going to color the line work. Okay. So to color the line work, if you haven't seen me do it before, I'm just going to take the line work, I'm going to put a layer above it, and I'm going to link it down over it so that it's constrained to just the line work. And I'm really just going to concentrate on the light values, and anything that's dark, I'm just going to kind of leave alone. And I do drop the opacity of the brush down because I don't want it to be, see if that's too heavy. I think that just took out too much too fast. So what's going on? Oh, now it's just being tricky. Okay. Give me 1 second. I went too far back in my history. Okay. So again, I'll sample the colors from where I'm painting, but I'm very slightly ghosting that in because I really do like maintaining some of the line work. But if you want to paint the line work completely out, then this is a good opportunity for you to just take the full color and just obliterate the line, and then you can go and paint on top of it with some solid colors and kind of really get the look. So I'm just calming some of this down. So like this area over here, it's just begging to be calmed down a little bit and make that line disappear a little bit. Blue. There. It's starting to work. So anywhere that's just like too much, the contrast is just too much, it's a great opportunity to just kind of calm that down. Yeah, I think that is just about it for this guy. You could definitely keep just tweaking things, but as far as the demo goes, that is going to be him for tonight. You guys have any questions on what I did? Anything you want to talk about besides this robot? Actually, you know, one thing that I say a lot and I haven't actually shown, but you know, like when there's art directors involved, and they may come to you and say like, you know, we really like the design, we like the design of the robot, blah blah blah, but you know, like we need them to be green, right? All right, so I'm gonna save a version of this. So I got my 02 version, you know, and if you're working in production, you probably have your 128 versions of these things. So what you can do with this technique in particular, and this is a lot of the reason why I work this way, because I really do like painting directly. I think that's really satisfying, but it's not always practical in a production environment. So I'm gonna shut my shading off, and I'm gonna pretend like the art director just came and said like, you know what, we really need this thing to be green. So let's find some new colors. So let's say he wants to be like a minty green, and then the secondary color is something else as well. You know, let's see. I always like oranges with, actually that kind of fuchsia looks nice. Yeah, that looks cool. All right, so like that's the direction they want to go now. Okay, so then we can collapse our flats again, and we're going to turn the shading back on, and most of it already works, right? Like it's pretty good, and for the most part the highlights are working. But what the only tweak that you would have to do at this point would be to you grab your flats and you're going to duplicate them, merge them into one group again like we did before, and then you're going to bring those up where the previous highlights that we did were, set those to the same layer mode, and then just copy that mask up on that and hide the other one, and now it's using the greens. So you can see it's a little, we didn't adjust it. I think I adjusted it down a little bit, you know, drop the saturation, tweak the color just ever so slightly for the highlights. But that right there gets me what I just changed the entire character to green. I was able to maintain all my lighting and everything, and I didn't have to worry too much about, you know, like all the hard work that we put into the shading and everything just being completely lost. So you know, yeah, and I highly recommend, if you're in a production environment, really working on your techniques to keep it so that if someone wants to change something, they don't have to, you know, nobody feels bad. You can get the best idea out, and if it needs to be green, it needs to be green, and you can I mean, if you can act like it's a big deal and freak out and storm out of the office, but you know deep down it's going to take you 5 minutes. So all right, so Carlton, hi Kenya, awesome. Is the video going to be available? Yes, Carlton, I will put as soon as I stop, it pretty much prompts me to start the process of putting it up, and there's some sort of processing that the YouTube does. It takes like, I think, half an hour or something like that. So if you check back in like a half an hour, the video should be up, and there'll be an updated thumbnail that I do in the meantime. So you'll see this robot pretty soon, and so then you guys can just watch it at your leisure whenever you want. Nick, you're gonna get it uploaded soon. Cool. Oh, you're answering for me. I thought you were still talking about your Inktober thing. Don't forget to put your Inktober up. Everybody's got to look at your Inktober, Samurai. Philippe's saying, amazing. You should do this kind of simple background. What kind of solutions do you have to make the character pop from the background? So, you know, you wanna basically frame. Okay. A couple things about backgrounds. You definitely want to make sure that that if you want the character to fall into the background, obviously you want to use similar colors. You don't want them to be too competing, but you can see like the legs and the arms. For me, Um, they have a lot of really interesting silhouette things that if I had a very similar color behind the sort of elbow area and the crotch area and the knees, if I had a similar color to the top down there, then all those kind of like craggy, interesting silhouette shapes would just disappear and just be too calm. So by having like a really bright color down there, it makes those really dynamic silhouette shapes pop. Versus the overall top, the value range of the highlights is carrying a lot of that form, so I can have a much more subdued and the color can be a little bit closer. So it's about balancing, trying to find areas that are, and I think that's probably why I fall prey to making these sort of like smoked backgrounds where like I can modulate things according to like what the forms are in front of them. But you always want to make sure that the forms are popping in the way that you want to. And obviously I don't think, like, if you're just doing like simple character renders, I don't think you want to go too crazy, like too detailed or anything like that. Like, let the character or whatever the primary focus is supposed to be the thing that's dominant. But I think having like a nice synonymous color, like working with the color palette, supporting that color palette, making the color palette of your character feel more interesting, is something that, like a nice little bit of color theory goes a long way. Ash is asking, did you make a lasso brush tool in Clip Studio, or did I make a lasso brush in Clip Studio, or did you just use the lasso tool? In Clip, I use their lasso fill brush. They have awesome brushes. You're welcome, Carlton. So I didn't make that lasso brush. So in my, let me go back to Clip real quick. In this lasso fill here, that's like a default that comes with Clip. And then the rest of these are the ones that I put up on Gumroad. So if anybody wants to download the rest of these brushes, you just go to Gumroad and download them. And then you just have to find the lasso fill brush, which I don't know where it is by default, but it's in there. And then just add that to your brushes. I think it's one of the default brushes that comes with Clip in its basic setup. And so I just moved it into my palette, so that's because it's where I use it the most. So for me it's 1:44 in the morning. I could take questions for like another 5 to 10 minutes, and then I can get started on uploading this thing and find a very soft pillow and go to sleep. No problem. I don't know if that answered your question directly, but yeah. See, there's the pink one again. You guys got anything else for me? Yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm so thankful that you guys are willing to just like hang out and let me draw and and just talk shop. It's really nice. Cool. So what's the plan for next Monday? What did somebody ask me to get to? There was one that was someone just asked me. So someone wanted rendering this week. It was just like how to come up with ideas, right? And like I think the last few streams and even the ones I did for Lightbox were much more technique driven. And I think there's starting to be a little bit of overlap going on. So I thought next week would be a good week to just start talking a little bit more about theory, and it's a little bit more esoteric, because I have my personal ways of dealing with it, and I want to hear other. I thought maybe we could have like a bit of a conversation about like ways other people come up with ideas. I think sort of the number one question besides like how do I find a style is like how do you come up with an idea. I think staring at that blank page is pretty ominous and frustrating. So I do want to kind of get into that. I think that could be a nice break from just strictly technique stuff and start coming up with like, how to add that story into your characters, how to add, how to come up with an idea, how to deal with an idea that's evolving and change, and that you need to change kind of like midstream. So I think that's what I want to focus with on Monday. But that does kind of like feed into what Pablo's asking about the community challenge thing. So we talked a little bit about the like how to get started with this, with like coming up with ideas and like how. So I think it's something that we need to kind of come up with like a little bit of a criteria on. Usually the way I would approach this is like, let's do something that everybody can kind of sink their teeth into a little bit easy at first. You don't want to say like, oh, we're designing a team of giant mechs that transform. Like, that's not fun. That's not a fun way to start a challenge. That's stress inducing. But if you say like, let's do like a little forest dwelling animal, right? An alien forest dwelling animal. Let's start working up silhouettes of that, and that's I think where we need to start. And I think someone was asking earlier on like, do I do silhouettes? Well, in this particular like type of thinking, I think it's worth challenging everyone to do 2 or 3 silhouettes of some silhouettes, to kind of start thinking about like ideas, to try that first thing that I was talking about earlier on in the video, which is you come up with your first idea and you feel like you've got either you hate it, which means you have to keep going, or you love it so much and then you have to force yourself to keep going because you're inevitably going to come up with a better idea. So I still don't know exactly how we're going to present them all. Does anybody have any ideas like what the best way to just like tag everybody's posts or something like that, so we can all kind of check them out? Because I think if you guys tag me in some silhouette drawings, I'd say like 3 silhouette drawings of a forest creature. Think like in the bunny world, but not a bunny. Like just like something really unique on an alien planet. If you tag me, then I can grab a few of them, and then next Monday we can spend like, 20 minutes, half hour just looking at some of the silhouettes that people have posted on Instagram. I think I can probably screenshot them, and then we can just spend a little time talking about like things that are successful and things that aren't successful, as long as everybody's willing to bring their thick skin. So if anybody wants to do something like that for next Monday, before the weekend, or during the weekend, like up till Sunday, tag me and say like #forest dweller. I'll put it in the chat. There you go. Lost Spirit Drawing Challenge. Thanks, Jake. So tag that Lost Spirit. Oh, don't get me into Discord. Oh, please, Philippe. I'm spread so thin with number of platforms that I have to deal with already. But you guys are welcome to. But if you guys tag me, I will screenshot as many as I can. If I don't get to yours, I'll just do better every week. But I'll grab 4 or 5 that stand out as having some good variation to them, and we'll just go through them, and so then the process would be like, we'll talk about them, which ones are successful, and then we're going to move on to the next stage, and I'll discuss what that next stage is. But I don't want to talk about it now, because if I tell you now, people are going to go too far. So let's do that. For the challenge, let's do a little forest dwelling animal. We'll take it through a couple of stages each week, and then we'll kind of like arrive at our finals, and then we'll move on to like a little bit more of an elaborate challenge. But let's just try it out with that. Does that sound good? I'm going to sip tea while I wait for the chat to catch up. All right, no one saying anything. I'm gonna executively decide that it's a good idea. All right, so we got the hashtag. Okay, Philippe gave me the sounds good. Okay, so anybody who's interested, we'll do the hashtag. We'll involve that a little bit next week, and then I think I'm gonna just spend most of the time at the beginning, just sort of like free sketching, like I did last week. But I think the conversation, and I hope that you guys will help me. Is just like, we're going to talk about ways that we all come up with ideas. I'll talk about the ways that I come up with ideas. Some of them will be very mechanical. Some of them will be very personal. And I think, you have to have a lot of different ways to get to a new idea. And sometimes that just means working randomly. And so we'll talk about all that stuff. Cool. You guys are awesome. I'm glad you guys are getting involved. I think that's awesome. And I think I've said it before, but I'll say it again. When you guys are doing these chats, if you guys want to promote yourselves and you want to throw your ats in the window, if you want to put your Instagrams or wherever you want people to go, by all means, drop them into the chats. That way people watching the videos later can see the stuff come up. If while we're doing these hashtag challenges, people can see what you're working on. So by all means, in any of these videos or in any of these live streams moving forward, also just, if you want to be dropping your Instagram accounts into the chat, do it so people can find you guys. Anything we can do to get everybody's eyes on each other. Some accountability. All right, we're closing in on 2 o'clock in the morning for me. I'm gonna spend a little time getting the video posted up, and then I will see you guys next week. Cool. Ash on Instagram, awesome. Yeah, I'm gonna have to check some of you guys out. Cool. All right, I'm gonna keep the chat going for like another 5 minutes if anybody else wants to drop their ats in, and then we will convene next Monday in some sort of unofficial/official capacity. Thanks, Nick. Thank you, Melody. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. It's been fun. I enjoy this very much. Yeah, man. Casper, don't ever. If you run out of questions, you're in trouble, man. Art is one of those things where you're just not. If you ever feel like you know everything, you're ruined. It's so. You're doing good, man. The more questions you got, the better you are. Cool. Sleepy Dumpling Art. That is an awesome name. Woo! You're welcome, Rhea. Alright, I am going to bail. You guys are awesome. I think the stream runs for another couple minutes or something like that, but if not, You can also drop your ats in the chat. Oh, not the chat. The comments. I don't know, wherever you guys feel comfortable. But feel free to use the platform to get a little promotion or get people's eyes on your work. Do what you gotta do. I will see you guys on Monday. Looking forward to seeing some of the hashtags. And you guys sleep tight. Talk soon.